So I'm sitting here in Duke's right now enjoying a James Bond martini, the home of where Bond from Ian Fleming's came from.
Ah, the old game. Give a wolf a taste and then leave him hungry. My friend, she's got you dangling. I'm Eddie Webb,
Spivey. Chris Spivey.
and today we're going to talk about James Bond and From Russia with Love here on Genreless. So we've been talking about it for a while. We've been like, we should do a run on James Bonds, and we decided to do it. We're doing it. Mostly because Chris and I both own the DVDs, so just about every Bond movie.
Just because I bought like those Blu-rays for the box set for that, and that was like from the origins all up to Skyfall was a big beautiful box set, and I bought it and it sat in my shelf until right now.
Was it still in the shrink wrap even?
It was, but I opened it so I could watch those episodes, specifically the episodes, those movies.
Yes.
I didn't watch any of the actual trailer, any of the actual additional information to give me more context to discuss because I was too busy.
Fair enough. Like so, I think maybe mentioned in the podcast, but like, part of this happened because when I was looking for DVDs for another episode we were recording, I happened to find someone had a mildly damaged box set of like almost all of the Bond movies on DVD for like 12 quid. And I was like, it's like 50p a movie, sure, why not? So I bought the whole thing and I started just watching them because I haven't watched the actual, aside from the Daniel Craig movies, I haven't watched any of the previous Bond films in decades. And it's like I'm gonna watch them from beginning to end. And I got reasonably far before I ran out of steam. But one of the nice things about getting that DVD set is that a lot of them, all of them have some kind of commentary track, and most of them have two commentary tracks and special features and whatnot. So this was neat because I had just seen From Russia with Love a few months ago, and now I had a chance to watch it again with the actual commentary. So it's a rare moment where like it was fresh enough in my mind that I could actually follow it with commentary, and actually I had a DVD that had commentary, so I can get some more background information, a lot of which I didn't know. So that's been really fun. I actually had done research, quote unquote, on this for once. But before we get into all
So
of that,
my question to you then, you said you watched them
Mhm.
all, watched them as you could till you peter out. Does that mean that you hit the worst Bond?
Which one would you define as the worst Bond?
Peter
Like I
Sellers.
say, Dalton. No, I have not. Okay, so the original Casino Royale is not officially a Bond film. It's same with Thunderball. I want to say it's another one that's it's never part of the package deal.
Wait. Are
Is that
you?
Thunderball? No, there was
Is it
one that Sean
Diamonds Are
Connery did.
Forever?
No, it's not
Diamonds
Diamonds Are
Are
Forever.
Forever.
No,
No.
that one's official one. Um, but there
Oh,
was
you
a
mean the one that was done by oh god, like this is a little research I've done. You might be right, it might be Thunderball.
right. So we should to take a step back. Um, the rights to James Bond movies were in flux for the first decade or two. So, what we're talking about is, originally there was a point where, Woody Allen did a James Bond film. He adapted Casino Royale, the very first Bond novel, and almost explicitly did it as a parody. It's kind of almost a proto, Austin Powers from what I've heard. I've never watched it, but I've heard
It
it's
it
very much clip.
is so bad that it almost comes around to being good, but then it goes really, really bad all the way down.
Right, right.
But if you do go and see it, you can see Ursula Andrews using her real voice speaking, and is probably one of the best actors in that movie.
Right. Um, and as you mentioned, Peter Sellers is Bond's, which uh, sets up a lot of interesting conversation. And then Sean Connery, who's the first James Bond that we're going to talk about, obviously a lot today, um,
Do you know that he
stepped
wasn't the
away.
first Bond, right?
Well, he wasn't the first. Wait, what do you mean?
He
He was the
wasn't
first.
the first Bond in visual media.
Okay, I actually don't know about this. Tell me about this.
There was a TV show that happened, I wanna say, was it 5 years before this, who had an American Bond, and they did essentially, it was like an episode where it was in black and white, and it was Casino Royale, and it was and they I think they called him Jimmy Bond.
Huh, I actually didn't know about this.
I forgot the actor's name. He's not super famous. I think he may even show up in one of the movies somewhere along the way in like a minor bit, but happened before the movie series came out. It was like a television show, and he was an American. American.
American. That's actually, pretty
Fuck yeah.
fascinating. Um,
Ridiculous. But yeah.
yes. Uh, but anyway, so, Sean Connery stepped away, and then another film company got the rights to remake, one of the novels that had already been done. So I think it was Diamonds Are Forever was basically the same beats in Thunderbolt. One of those, I have to double check. But one of the Sean Connery movies was basically functionally remade as another Sean Connery movie 10 years later by a different company.
I
Um,
think that was because one person had like the specific rights to that film. It's something, it was like very specific, and it's the only reason they could make it, but then they made it in competition versus whatever the Broccoli's are doing. Like
right,
it's
right,
it's very hazy, but there's like a very specific reason they could make that movie themselves and it'd be
right,
legal.
right. It was well, I mean, much like Doctor Who, right? This is a franchise that's actually slightly older than Doctor Who. So I mean, there's a lot of rights weirdness in the early days that it could be fun to dig into. But probably should start from the beginning, which is the novels. Um, Novels were written by Ian Fleming. He was someone who worked in British intelligence before he decided to become a novelist. And he decided he wanted to write some novels about the experience of being a British agent. And this is where analysis of James Bond gets a bit weird because if you read the original novels, which I have, although it's been decades,
Yeah.
um,
God,
James
over
Bond is
30
not a good
years.
person. James
Well,
Bond is
James Bond in the movies isn't a good person either, Eddie.
he's worse in the books, is what I'm saying. He's even more explicitly sexist, even more explicitly racist, and he's pretty much an assassin for hire. Uh, and so the initial intent was that Ian Fleming wanted to make James Bond a bland character. He was meant to be just a template. He picked what he thought was the most boring name possible. Anyone could fill the shoes, and the fact he's even given a number further reduces his
Hmm.
he's meant to be a character that you're not supposed to sympathize with. He's simply a character that you can inhabit.
So I thought that he got the name from a bird watching book because he was a big bird
Yes,
watcher. Okay.
yes, yes. That is true. And literally, it was came down to he chose James pretty quickly, and then was looking around and thought, "Oh, this guy is a bird watching book. That's about as boring as I could think of. So I'll call him Bond." Um, and so the idea was, here's this guy who's living it up on the British dime in the 50s, so it's during or just after British austerity, murdering people at the government's behest. It was meant to be a fairly damning critique of where he saw the British Secret Service going. Except people really loved them because this glamorous guy gets to go around the world and murder people pretty much without consequences. It was a pure power fantasy. Mm.
Also at the time though, didn't the publishers didn't want to publish it because they thought it wouldn't be successful, and he had to pull essentially strings because if I remember right, Fleming also came from a fairly well-to-do family and knew a lot of
Yes.
people and had connections. So he was able essentially to get the book published, and then it became a phenomenon. They had multiple book runs of it.
Right. The two biggest reasons, well, three reasons why he was successful. One, like you said, he didn't quite get it self-published, but damn near. He basically just threw a bunch of money into publisher and they published it. Um, Two was like I said, the idea of someone anywhere being glamorous and living in luxury in the mid 50s in Britain was a very attractive viewpoint.
Just not
And
in Britain. I think at the time in the 50s, the idea of anyone able to jet set around the world would have been attractive.
right, but in the U.S., they were seen as a bit coarse until, which is the third reason, John F. Kennedy.
Yep.
John F. Kennedy came out as a fan of the books and said they had him by his nightstands, and because JFK was a trendsetter, the books skyrocketed in the U.S. And they'd already been getting reasonably successful in the UK. So they became a worldwide phenomenon pretty quickly after that in the 60s.
And that's why From Russia with Love was made, because that was, I think Jake Kennedy said this was his favorite book. And that's why I think this was the fifth book in the book run, and it was made as a
Mhm.
second movie. And
Right.
JFK got to see it right before he was killed.
You saw it
It's
in
like, I
Dallas,
think the
didn't you?
last, I think so. This was like the last movie that he saw. So
Yeah,
a weird piece of history.
right. And so Dr. No was the first movie, which is 61, and it was made on, at the time, extremely minuscule budget. For the kind of movie it was shooting to be, it was extremely cheap film. And we talked about potentially covering it because, like, in the vein of our usual things, like try to cover the pilot. But after some discussion, Doctor No is really not representative of the movie franchise at all. It's just frankly only an okay film.
And so I went and did my homework and I watched Doctor No before I watched From Russia with Love.
I've also seen Doctor No too, so
Well, did you see it last week?
no, I didn't see it last week. It's been several months, but I have watched it.
And it is a solid movie. It's not a James Bond movie. It's almost more like a
Right.
detective-esque movie built in that style and fashion. Similar to From Russia with Love, but if you make it 30% less cool than is Doctor No.
Right. Um, so minor spoilers, but like Goldfinger is the movie that cements the what we now know as the James Bond formula.
I'm sorry, what movie?
Goldfinger.
No, I'm sorry, what movie?
Goldfinger.
There you go. There you go.
Right. Um, you can make the argument, and maybe I will when we get to that episode, that all James Bond movies after Goldfinger are basically trying to do Goldfinger over again. So From Russia with Love was an interesting one to choose because it's not quite yet the formula, but it is closer to it than Doctor No is. So you can see it's a better way of looking at James Bond before James Bond becomes cemented. This is still James Bond in flux. It's getting closer to its cinematic version, but not quite there.
Well, in Doctor No, I'd say they probably had about 60% of Bond figured out, maybe 65% of it squared away
Right.
from the jump. This is
This is
pushing
closer
us
to
up to
80.
about 80%.
Yep. Right.
My question for you, though, Eddie,
Mhm.
at the start, right now, we're going to say it before we go and watch anything else. What is your favorite Bond movie in the franchise?
See,
Oh, gotta have
uh,
one.
I mean, I do, but the problem is that I haven't watched all of them again, so this may change. But at the moment, I genuinely still think that Daniel Craig Casino Royale is probably my favorite film.
Okay. Uh, this is my favorite James Bond movie.
Okay, that explains why you pushed for this one.
So for listeners to know, I didn't push. I said I almost did this. I had a choice between this one and the one I'm actually going to cover, and it was hard. But in the end, I chose the other one over this one because while this is my favorite James Bond movie, it is not the best James Bond movie, and there's a distinction.
And that's very fair. Uh, uh, but From Russia with Love is interesting because, like you said, Doctor No is it's a solid film. For a 1961 uh, 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 spy-ish film, Doctor No is just fine. You put on TV, you have a good time watching it. Um, From Russia with Love is a good film.
Yeah.
It is not quite a Bond film, and that is an interesting distinction. But it's just some data to kind of prove my point. Um, From Russia with Love doubled Doctor No's gross, so the audiences also liked what they saw with Doctor No, but loved what they saw with From Russia with Love.
But didn't it cost
Um,
twice as much?
It did.
to make for production.
They did double the budget because they weren't sure about what they were going to do with Doctor No. And then when they realized this was something that they could do with, they got a lot more money. And that was something actually the commentary track talked about was they talked with one of the initial prop designers, and they said they basically had nothing to work with Doctor No. He's like, it was a glorified television budget, frankly. And now they actually got a proper movie budget, and they were able to do more with From Russia with Love.
Because like from off the top of my head, I think Doctor No cost around $1 million to make, and it grossed about, was it 40 million? And I think this one cost around 2 million to make, and it grossed almost 80 million or something like that. Those are off the top of my head without googling.
Closer to 90. Yeah, because it earns 12.5 million at the worldwide box office, and then when it was re-released, it made 78 million after that, of which 24 was from North America. Yeah, of that, I mean, it's added together, that's a bit more like 90 million. But yes, and to be that's 90 million in 1963 dollars.
Yeah.
So we're talking something closer to like $500 million in modern dollars.
And I also think that from the success of Doctor No, and they said since they were going to make From Russia with Love, and with JFK talking about the movie so much, I think Connery got like a bonus addition to his pay that was like $100,000 or something to make him happy to come back.
Yes, right. So the other thing that's interesting about the movies is when they started with Doctor No, they realized they could not adapt the novel directly because, as I pointed out, James Bond is just an asshole. And he's an asshole in the movies too, don't get me wrong, but he's even worse in the movies. Like, they had to give him some kind of charm. And Doctor No, reasonably mixed success on that front. Like, Bond's straight up mocks people in Doctor No, and in a very kind of malicious way. It's a little more subdued in From Russia with Love, and then he becomes kind of just it all becomes one-liners and quips when you get to Roger Moore, right? But
Well,
From
also
Russia with
wasn't
Love,
the Bond in the book almost more like an accountant sort of style, like the Taylor Tinkerer's Soldier Spy sort of model for spy, from like looks?
Yeah, he was so basically that's a good point. Let's talk about British espionage novels for a second. John le Carre was the other big espionage writer at the time, and so he wrote what are now somewhat incorrectly called the Smiley novels. But yes, that one that you mentioned is same with like The Spy Who Came from the Cold is probably his most iconic novel. They're also British espionage novels, but the le Carre novels are very different in the sense that they are outright, they're not condemnations of British espionage. They go more into the cost of it. That the people in le Carre novels are very innocuous, and they have to make extremely morally dubious decisions for esoteric gains. And so it's the idea of they're more like horror in some respects, honestly. And the fact it talks about the emotional weight and the what it does, what espionage does to people, how it grinds them down. There's a particular scene in The Spy Came from the Cold, which is just they're trying to get someone across the Berlin Wall, and so there are a couple of British spies camped out at the crossing, and they're having to decide if they want to shoot the guards on their side to benefit the story of the person trying to get to come across the border. That's the kind of stories le Carre does. Fleming didn't quite go that far, but certainly it was more of the brutality of espionage. The phrase used for Daniel Craig's Bond, calling him a blunt instrument, comes from the original stories, for example, and that was very much how the original novels were written. Now, there's a bit of weirdness here in the sense that as the Ian Fleming novels became popular and as the movies became popular, Ian Fleming was still writing novels, and so his novels started to slowly become more like the cinematic Bond. So there's a point where it shifts and adjusts over time, but those first few novels were not meant to glorify Bond. And so when they start adapting those novels, when they did Doctor No, and it's just like, okay, because the rights for Casino Royale were weirdly unavailable, and turned out it's because Woody Allen had them for some fucking reason. So they chose Doctor No instead, and they had to change Bonds to make him a sympathetic character for the screen, and that's I think one of the reasons why maybe they jumped several books up is they wanted to get to something that was a little closer to how the Ian Fleming Bonds and the movie Bonds could overlap. But a fair chunk of Bonds is not quite here yet. We'll see it more in future nods. Is that it's also a bit self-satirical. Bond works best when you realize that Bonds somewhat understands that his world doesn't make sense, a bit like, again, like the Doctor, the contemporary character, is that Bond doesn't realize he's in a movie, but Bond does kind of half realize that this shit shouldn't work this way. Um, From Russia with Love isn't quite there yet, but it's a lot closer than Doctor No. Doctor No's played extremely straight, even though it's a ludicrous story. Because with Russia from Love, Bond's starting to get in on the joke, as it were.
And one of the reasons that we can keep bringing up Doctor Who, I think I mentioned this during our Doctor Who run, is that I forgot her name now, but the actress who played Barbara was a person that connected Connery to someone that got him the role to be Bond. So there is a
Yes.
Doctor Who lineage that goes throughout Bond right there, but establishing Connery. Because one of the other things is that Ian Fleming didn't want Sean Connery to be Bond.
Right.
He
'Cause he's too
didn't want
Scottish.
yep. he didn't want someone of like his socioeconomic class to play his highfalutin spy.
Which is interesting because, and sadly I've forgotten his name. I should have written it down. The director for both Doctor No and From Russia with Love, uh, is often the one who gets cited as the person who cemented what the cinematic Bond looked like because he often wore evening dress. He was had a very posh accent, was very classy and glamorous, and so was the director who actually put his stamp on what Bond should look like and act like in these movies. That then progressed further beyond that. So you're right. He didn't feel like Connery could do the job, but what Connery ended up doing is he provided a bit of that darker grit that they then built the glamour around, which is one of the reasons why I think he's seen as one of the better Bonds, whereas Roger Moore pretty much
Ugh.
only played the glamorous side of the character, and frankly, the self parody later on slides it directly into just straight up parody for that Bond.
And if you look at Craig's Bond, you'll see that a lot of Craig's stuff pulls heavily from Connery,
Yeah,
just in comparison, if you're looking at the two. But yeah, because like Sean Connery is fascinating. I'm not even talking about his, I don't know if they were alleged or if what happened to him, but he has some problems with women. So like physical abuse of women is one of the things associated with Sean Connery.
yep,
And I'm not going to touch on that because I don't know enough about that part of the history. But I will point out the fact that Connery like served in the military. He was a boxer and like this array of other things. Could have even got put on a professional football team. And when I say football, I'm saying football as if I am a British person in that variation of
right.
football, not American football.
Marka.
But he turned it down and did more acting stuff. So it is utterly fascinating, like the different routes he could have gone. And this is where he ended up.
Yeah, yeah, and uh, which I mean, obviously in retrospect, it's one of those things where it's like you can't imagine anybody else playing that first role, and certainly after he retired, was forced off. That again, there's debate on that point. Um, there was some struggle around how to replace him because he does bring a very specific, iconic view to the role. But one of the things that he does really well, especially in these earlier movies, is that he's blending the glamour and the danger in a very compelling and a word we use a lot, watchable way. Um, because say what you will about Sean Connery, and lots of people have, and lots of people will, but he's damned entertaining to watch. His charisma
Well,
is astounding.
he brought swagger to the role. The
Yes,
amount of
that's a good way of
swagger
putting it.
cannot be underestimated and is essential to the character to make it engaging to have the film franchise. If we'd had the book Bond, they might have gotten a movie, maybe even 2 before it was kaput.
Right, right,
Because
and
some of the people they thought about initially, in his view, were like David Niven, which David Niven is a phenomenal actor. But
mhm,
David Niven couldn't be this Bond, much like Cary Grant couldn't be this Bond.
right, right. Um, it's and it's in some ways a challenging character because uh again, much like the Doctor, he is an institutional character that's associated with a very specific part of the world. He's a British icon, and unlike the Doctor, where each actor brings a very different focus onto the same core character, um, Bonds can't change too much from a very specific set of parameters. But over the decades, we found that there is actually amount of sliding around you can do. Um, Timothy Dalton, for example, was derided because he was seen as too dark. He was seen as too brutal of a character because people hadn't were just coming off Roger Moore and they thought it was too much of a tone shift. It was akin to a Doctor generation where it's like they go a very extreme other direction with the same character archetype, and people rejected it. Now, after over a decade of Daniel Craig, I think Dalton's being reappraised a little more favorably because there is room for a darker Bond, but that was just too hard of a shift too fast, and also it was in the '80s, So
Well, they had that plus a so part of the thing that we didn't really talk about for Bond that we should have just given like a warning is that Bond will be racist, sexist, and
yes,
so many other isms associated with it from the drop. We should probably put that top, but I want to make that point specifically because for Dalton in the 80s, which we're all over the place, we're just generally talking about Bond now,
yeah,
is that it did a hard shift to move away from the womanizing that associated with James Bond. To take that shift and make it a darker thing, it becomes not Bond for a lot of the general audience that you have.
right, and that's a good point. For as much as Doctor Who is a liberal British icon, James Bond is a conservative British icon, and uh, certain even more than Doctor Who, there's certain parts of the quote unquote formula that become very hard to reduce out. Much as Doctor Who is assumed to have a young female companion, there is the quote unquote Bond girl. That is now an archetype of casting that happens. And it's something that whenever a Bond film is announced, the Bond girl is announced with the same fervor as a Doctor Who companion. So there's an archetype that comes that his sexuality is something that is very much something that needs to that can't be completely removed from the character. But again, there have been attempts, like you said, there are adjustments to be made. Um, and I think it's okay. We're talking. This is the intro to Bond, so I think it's okay that we're sliding around. We will be following all of this as we track through. Um,
To that
but
point,
yeah,
one of the other actors that I think that could have been Bond would have been fascinating to see would have been Patrick McGowan, like the legendary and great Patrick McGowan. And because they approached him and he's like, I'll do Bond, but only if we remove all the sex from it. And they're like,
right.
fuck no. And so once again, that would have been similar to like the Dalton thing where they tried to like minimize all that aspect of the character and it wasn't going to work. But I would have been loved to have seen Patrick McGowan be James Bond. I think he would have done 3 movies and said, this is enough for me.
You can kind of see that if you watch Secret Agent. But that's also weird because he briefly played an American in Secret Agent before he suddenly became British for no apparent reason. So it's a
Bond was
separate
also an American in the TV show. And then he became British in the
right,
movies.
right. Um, which leads to a whole weird thing because a lot of people point to James Bond and say that is where the super spy genre started. And that's not entirely true, as you pointed out. It was actually kind of already happening in the late 50s before it really exploded in 63. So certainly From Russia with Love is where it became a form that people wanted to replicate. But there are predecessors to From Russia with Love, and Doctor No was one of a small collection of things that were trying to find a way to make espionage a fun genre to explore. And it was happening both in America and in the UK. And then when Bond seemed to hit on a formula that worked, then after that, most other espionage media became some form of or refutation of James Bond, even down to the fact
So
that iconic espionage characters have the initials JB.
I'm trying to remember what year Mission Impossible, the TV series, started. So, but now to your point, there was a lot of attempts to try to make it work, but it was Bond that cemented it and pretty much kicked off the entire Super Spy franchise. And it is
Right.
amazing how how Goldfinger, it really turns into like pulp after that point. It is pulp spy fiction.
Yes.
And right now we're at that point where it's getting to be there. That's why I love this movie, because it's more of like a drama with a few action beats, but it's a detective movie to some extent.
Hmm. Yeah. 66, by the way, is when Mission Impossible became popular.
Thank you.
Uh, um, uh, but to your point, this is what's fascinating about watching James Bond again recently for me is that there is this perception that James Bond is a Cold War creation. It's not wrong. The Cold War certainly increased interest in espionage fiction as a result. Um, but the amount of times James Bond goes against an actual named country are extremely low. He goes up against largely fictional organizations that are multinational in disposition. Of course, the nations that make them up generally are people that we are at war with in the Cold War, so it's not entirely removed. It's Spectre, and it's Doctor No was a just a scientist who had his own base. Um, so I
What?
mean,
Mm.
Doctor No it was Doctor No was I mean he was funded by other countries, and that's was a part of it. But like Doctor No
In the
was
movies, in the
mhm,
movies, if I remember right, Dr. No is number 2,
of Spectre. Yes,
Spectre.
right,
Yeah, because as you're saying, they moved away from targeting specific countries because they want to try to avoid any political controversies associated with it, which is why
right,
they
right, right.
stopped using like Schmurfs or whatever it was, and it all became
Yes,
Spectre, and it was a criminal syndicate instead, a
right.
multinational criminal syndicate, which I think is a brilliant and beautiful idea.
Yes, exactly. And this is your point. Like in some ways, James Bond, you're right, is fundamentally a detective story because really he's just going against extremely uh, epic scale organized crime. So that's a fascinating piece because you're right. In the novels, Smersh was his primary antagonist, which was Russian intelligence, and Smersh comes up occasionally it actually comes up in this movie too. It comes up in the other novels or in other movies, but generally speaking, is Spectre initially, and then when the rights to Spectre get a little weird, they find other organizations for him primarily to go against. Again, the people who compose those organizations and the accents they have and the people they cast for them certainly slant towards a fairly specific xenophobic view of the world. But they never say we're fighting China, right?
Yeah. Well, part of it, because then you'll see that, like, for instance, Grant in this movie is definitely from where Bond is from, like that area where Bond is from. That's where Grant comes from.
Mhm,
Like, that's one of the reasons why they can do stuff like that and make it seem more multinational. And I love it. It's 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 a nice play. It makes a lot of people happy, but at the same time, you can tell some of the stories that you want to tell. And it's
mhm.
easier, I think, for people to go and see Bond killing criminals, not necessarily people just loyal to their country trying to protect their country.
Right, right. Is there anything else about James Bond in general that you want to talk about before I get into this movie specifically?
That I think you touched on it, but I want to say I think it was I thought it was the director from Goldeneye that taught Sean Connery how to be Bond.
Goldfinger, you mean?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's the same director for all three movies. I could be wrong on that point.
I don't. I think Goldfinger. I think Golf. Yeah, I think Goldfinger's different because they
Maybe.
didn't get the same director for Goldfinger, but I think he came back after Goldfinger. Like the director for Goldfinger was there for that
Uh,
movie. So I
okay.
could be wrong about who taught Connery all the swagger, but there was one of the directors that taught him how to do all that. because I think it was the same person potentially that tried to teach. God, I forgot his name now. He's in Lazenby, the same thing.
Okay. That makes sense. But which I think brings up a valid point is that Bond is ultimately a composite character. Each actor obviously brings their own approach to the role, and as Bond evolves, we've discovered that there is room to have fairly distinct Bonds inside of that larger role. But it's not just, at least initially, it's not just the actor. The actor's learning and shaping their performance into this very specific niche, which at the point we're talking about now doesn't exist yet, right? They're still discovering it. They're still learning about it.
My last piece. The actress who plays Moneypenny, I think Lois Montgomery, was given the option of playing Moneypenny or Sylvia, whatever her name was supposed to be, love interest, who was supposed to be in like a lot of the James Bond movies and like becomes the person that Bond really like settles down with. And I think there was an interview where she talked about she didn't choose that role because she didn't want to be the woman that did it. She wanted to be the woman that flirted. And it is an incredible choice that she made as she got to be in so many movies. And Sylvia just sort of vanishes after this movie. So gone.
Yep.
Because she's the one piece from Dr. No that really doesn't work.
Right. And it's easy to mention because they do interview her on the commentary track, and she does explicitly talk about the sexual tension between Moneypenny and Bond, and the fact that it is unresolved. She felt like was part of the formula for those early Connery films. I think it's absolutely true. Side note, this commentary track that I listen to is bonkers, because most commentary tracks I listen to, they get a handful of people into a studio, they watch the movie, and they just talk over the movie, pretty much. This was produced. There was one person who was a host for the commentary track, who was from the Ian Fleming Society, or Ian Fleming Foundation, I should say. And then he interviewed a bunch of people separately, and it was all edited together to talk about very specific parts of the movie. And so, like when they analyzing the fight scene, for example, they talk to the choreography person. When they're talking, when they have Moneypenny scene, they talk to the actor who plays Moneypenny. So they had like 15 people they interviewed during the course of this commentary track. It is wild. I've never heard any kind of commentary track like this.
Yeah. All right. Then I will have to definitely try to do that for whenever the next film, whatever it is that we talk about when I watch it. I think you forgot to mention one of the most important things about the entire movie, Eddie, that
Which
cements its legacy. It was so impressive that they went and made a video game of this movie.
They did. In 2005.
Decades later.
They remade From Russia with Love in 2005, and Sean Connery reprised his role as a voice actor for that movie.
That's how important this movie is. Love it. Oh,
yeah, as I understand it, From Russia with Love is the James Bond aficionado favorite movie, as opposed to Goldfinger, which is the filthy casual favorite movie.
I am a very fancy man. I had high
very
tea
fancy man.
When I was in London. I was at Duke's and I had my James Bond martini. I had my Vespa martini. I am a very, very fancy person. Which, if we've done this properly, I apologize for the bad audio that you probably heard from me in Duke's. That I had to do very softly because it was late at night and there are a lot of people there.
Right, exactly. Okay, so anything else before we dive into the movie proper?
No, let's get this started.
All right. So movie starts off and James Bond is killed. 5 minutes in the movie. It's an extremely short film. We spent all the time talking about a movie that's only 5 minutes long.
And then he
walks around a
regenerates.
garden and gets killed. Right. Yeah, and then he changes his face and he becomes a different character. It's very weird. It's really just Doctor Who episode. Just no. No, it turns out that it's part of training because international criminal organization Spectre is seeking revenge against MI6 agent James Bond for the death of their agent Dr. No in Jamaica from the previous movie. Spectre's chief planner, Czechoslovakian chess grandmaster Kronstein, develops a plan to lure Bond into a trap using as bait the prospects of procuring a Lector cryptography device from the Soviet Union's consulate in Istanbul. Spectre operative Rosa Klebb, a former head of SMERSH, which is the Soviet counterintelligence organization we talked about earlier, is assigned to oversee the mission and uses trained killer Donald Grant to assassinate Bond at the right moment. Set the trap, Klebb recruits a cipher clerk at the consulate, Tatiana Romanova, who unwittingly assists in a plan by tricking Romanova into believing Klebb is actually still working for SMERSH. So that's a lot of setup. We actually don't see a lot of Bonds in that initial setup, except for the fake out at the very beginning.
Well, that was the reason that scene's actually there.
Right.
So do you know that scene originally? So this movie underwent a lot of heavy editing, and they
I
moved
got that
different
impression from the
pieces
commentary.
around. Because originally that piece was supposed to happen sometime after that, but then they were like, if we don't do this now, people won't see this as a James Bond movie because Bond doesn't show up for 20 minutes or something obscene. So that's why it's also such a high quality. They move it before the gun barrel scene, which makes it utterly striking and engaging and like grips you right away, which is part of the reason why the movie works.
Yep. Yeah, because this is the first movie that has a cold open, which becomes a staple of the Bond films after that. Also part of the running gag, because for several movies after this, you have some form of James Bond is believed to be dead before the opening credits. So there's a running bit of this. But yeah, also amusingly, when they first filmed this, they originally were going to film this in the training school that we'll see a bit later. And they decided to change it to this garden scene, which is better. And then they had to shoot again because the actor they had put under the mask looked like Sean Connery. So the initial test audiences just thought that they pulled a mask of Sean Connery off to see Sean Connery under the mask and were very confused as to what was going on. So they had to reshoot it with someone with a mustache to make it very clear it was not actually James Bond.
Oh, I love it. Love it. Okay, what do you think of Grant right now when you see him? Like, what's your initial thoughts of this guy?
He's a bit bland at this point in the movie. He's kind of just generic blonde guy. I do like how his silence makes him pretty creepy. But that we don't. It takes a while for the movie to really cement this guy's just not talking, and how creepy that is. Right now, it's just he's staying quiet because he's trying to track James Bond down. So at the moment. But one of the things that this does, which I think to your earlier point that really helps cement the movie, is this guy took down a fake version of James Bond, but then sets up he may be good enough to take down the real version of James Bond. So it is a way of saying this guy is dangerous. So when he actually does confront Bond later in the movie, we're not in doubt as to what's going to happen because we know how media works, but there's tension there that without this scene would have just been another punch up for Bond, right?
Well, how media works now, but people in 63, I think is when this was, or 62, didn't necessarily know that. So I'm trying to think of it from like their perspective. Come on. In the movie 60s.
It's the second movie of I mean, they don't know it's a franchise yet, but it is the second James Bond movie, and James Bond is extremely popular. Killing James Bond in the second movie would have been a bit weird.
It would have been a ballsy move that I think they would have done in the 60s.
I mean, that would have been amazing if they killed Bond in it. I have a very different franchise after that.
Then they just have like Jimmy Bond, the son of Bond, running around.
Right. James Bond Jr. James Bond Jr.
I like the organization of Spectre built. I am ignoring that cartoon. I like the buildup of Spectre here with the mysterious person stroking a cat, which Inspector Gadget will steal in the future.
Yep.
But getting everything all laid out like this, hearing the plan, especially if you've seen Dr. No, it builds on the story, which is Knightspeed. And I will eventually miss Spectre when it goes away.
One of the interesting things about again with this movie right now is that they're attempting a continuity. They're attempting what we would now call a cinematic universe, right? Whereas that the Bond movies do reflect and flow into each other. The idea that this is going to be just an extremely expensive television show released, 2 years at a time. That's something that will go away pretty quickly. But at this point in time, this is the sequel to Doctor No, right? You can watch this without having watched Doctor No, but it is going to reference Doctor No.
And I want you to think though, we're in 62. So we know number one is some mysterious person. Number two, as bad as it was, is technically, I think, was a Asian man. And
Mhm.
I'm using that term very loosely because if you watch Doctor No, we all know.
Mhm.
And number three is a woman. Like that is their organizational head structure. So evil organization, incredibly progressive
Yeah.
versus what we're
I
going
mean,
to see bringing them all down.
going by what we've seen, and in one case by accent, the head of Spectre is British, or at least trains in England in terms of by his accent. Yeah, number two is Asian, presumed to be Chinese. Number three is Russian and a woman. So yeah, and number five is Czechoslovakian.
And a lesbian.
I don't think it's text, but yes, definitely subtextual.
Eddie. All right. I'm trying to think from the 60s perspective. She's awesome, by the way. Like I
Oh yeah,
want
sure.
this
Rosa Parks
character to
great.
come back and be in all the movies, but they didn't happen.
Yeah,
Is that when she goes to Tatiana, she like touches her hair. She does a lot of other sort of touching that at the time would have had people shocked. Shocked, I say, for that time.
sure. I'm not saying it's not very close to the surface, but it is still subtextual. It is not explicitly spelled out. Yes, she's lesbian. It leads into another bigger problem, which is that the James Bond novels and James Bond movies paint lesbianism either as evil or as something that can be cured by a man. So that's a whole separate problem that we have to deal with.
I wasn't going to talk about that unless we cover one of the other movies that it touches on with James Bond, his magical penis that can fix the world.
Right, right. Who can fix lesbianism? But yes, from outside of that, because it is, let's say, slightly subtextual. Let's put it that way. Um, uh, then Rosa Klebb comes across as Spectre hires extremely diversely. Spectre has DEI policies,
Which we've heard are illegal now. And I
because of
love
Spectre
it
apparently.
because I love it's number five's plan, but she executed. So, but it still shows you all these moving pieces how they're relying on people who have like are subject matter experts to do things.
Right. And another thing that I love from a nuance perspective is that number three is either still in Smirsh or at least has enough authority and contacts that she can still pretend to be part of Smirsh, so that Spectre does have its tendrils very much everywhere, and we're starting to see. Uh, uh, we got bits of it in Doctor No, but we're starting to see here that it is genuinely literally a multinational conspiracy, um, which again will inspire decades worth of those massive multinational organized crime syndicates like Cobra is on some level. Cobra for GI Joe kind of starts here on some level, you know.
I don't support Cobra A.
No, Cobra's
I
bad.
say Cobra. La, 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 la.
I see. You're a a clone created from the genetic stock of 1,000 Warriors guy, a Serpentor man, if you will.
Supintor. How could we're not gonna talk about the G.I. Joe movie unless we cover the G.I. Joe movie. And
Right.
listeners, if one of you ask us to cover the G.I. Joe movie, we're fucking cover the G.I. Joe movie.
um, the other thing that I find interesting is that we're starting to see the things that will become tropes that get either referenced or parodied later. Specifically because we just watched The Prisoner relatively recently. There's the point where Kronstein has a drink delivered to him during his chess match, which, by the way, gorgeous set for that chess match. A
Yeah.
beautiful, elaborate, completely over the top, which is going to be a staple of James Bond films. But Kronstein gets a drink, and under his little napkin in the drink is a note saying, you know, hey, we need to talk to you. with the Spectre logo because it's super fucking subtle. It's like, hey, evil organization wants to talk to you. By the way, enjoy your drink. Um,
They
which
wouldn't know. It would be like just your symbol that's on the inside of the organization.
right. But that gets actually parodied in The Prisoner because there's an episode called "The Girl Who Was Death," which is meant to be a parody of these kinds of things, and where number 6 drinks a drink and it says you are being poisoned. You have been poisoned at the bottom of the glass. And may even also be the Spectre organization structure may also be where the everyone in the village has a number shtick also comes from. Although that may be more generally the numbers in Spectre may have meant to be a parody of the numbers in the British Secret Service. I mean, where the actual thrust is pointed to is maybe secondary here, but specifically that moment, that specific scene was parodied then in The
I
Prisoner.
think the numbers in The Prisoner are meant to parody the numbers in Bond.
I thought so, yeah.
And this is my assertion because of number 2. Number 2 here, Dr. No is killed in the first movie.
Right.
Until we don't get another number 2. But then all throughout The Prisoner, we keep getting different number 2s the whole time.
Okay, yes, I thought so. I thought it was specifically directed at Spectre, but I wasn't sure.
And we can't have Patty McGowan be number 7, so he's number 6 instead of 7. So it's like those slight little things. And even in Austin Powers, where you get like the joke, who does number 2 work for? Like,
right.
Oh. In case people are curious, I may be a fan of spy fiction.
It's jokes all the way down. The other thing, which we'll see a lot of for this movie, is the casting is both extremely diverse and extremely stupid. In the sense that actors from all over the world were hired for James Bond movies, in particular for this movie, but then they played roles that were not at all their actual ethnicity. So Kronstein was played by a Polish actor, for example, and Rosa Klebb was played by Italian actress, I want to say. And
his friends in the Turkish embassy, like his Turkish contact, was played by a Mexican actor, I think.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of that happening. So it's weird in that front, but as a result, a fair number of
characters. Did you know
the woman? Okay.
The number 1 here is played by like the shrink or whoever it was in Dr. No, who James Bond kills, and with the best line ever to date. Like, it's revolver. You've had your 6. Bam, dead. Loved it. That is a cold Bond. The part that they sort of play with and lose throughout the series. That is fascinating to watch. And that is an aspect of Bond that I love that.
Yeah, I agree. But a lot of the actors were revoiced. Blofeld was revoiced, even though it's different. You said different actors
Who
playing the body, but someone else played the voice of Blofeld.
Who? I don't know
Blofeld.
Did he? I just know number 1.
Sorry, number 1. My apologies. Number 1. But Tatiana, she was revoiced by a different actress in post. I believe Kronstein was revoiced as well. So a fair number of characters were revoiced.
Interesting.
Anyhow, anything else about this early ramp-up stuff?
No, just that I think Spectre should have been a bigger part of the entire franchise.
I agree. In London, Bond is called to a meeting with M and informed that Tatiana has requested Bond's help to defect to the West in exchange for providing British intelligence with a Lecter device. Exactly as Kronstein predicted, M suspects a trap but decides to honor Tatiana's request. Before departing, Bond is equipped with a special briefcase from Q Branch containing several defensive gadgets and an Armalite AR-7 sniper rifle to help with this assignment. Upon arriving in Istanbul, Bond works alongside the head of MI6's branch in the city, Ali Karim Bey, while he awaits word from Tatiana. Donald Grant, an Spectre assassin, shadows Bond to protect him until he steals the Lecter. During this time, Karim Bey is attacked by Soviet agents Krylenko. After an attack on the men where they hide out in a Romani settlement, Karim Bey assassinates Krylenko with Bond's help before he completes the city. So, a lot of stuff happens there.
Before we get into it, the actor who played Ali Karim Bey By the way, I love that character so
Yeah,
much.
I love
Um,
MVP of this movie, 100%.
Unfortunately, I don't know if you knew this or if this is more urban legend, is that they had to shoot most of his scenes very early on because
Yes,
they was diagnosed with inoperable cancer.
yes.
And so they had to shoot most of his scenes, and eventually someone will stand in as like a body double here and there. But then he went home and unfortunately killed himself.
Not entirely true. Almost that's true.
That's why I didn't know if it was urban legend.
When he went home, he actually re-recorded his dialogue before he finally passed away. So he didn't go home and just kill himself. He actually went home and then went to a studio to re-record some dialogue because some of the pickups weren't quite good enough. Um, but yeah, that's Pedro Armendariz, who was apparently a big leading star in Mexican cinema. So he was a well-known Mexican actor, and in fact, begged, even though he was sick, he begged to be in this movie because he wanted this to be his last movie.
And I want to bring up another specific point is like the casting of the character, how well it was done, even though they're not the ethnicity they're supposed to be from the movie perspective. This is a character that was done better than the character from Doctor No, who was the boat
Poirot.
captain slash a bunch of stereotypes put into the movie. He was
Right.
Bond's helper.
Yes. You're right. Despite the fact that a Mexican man is playing a man of different cultural heritage, Karim Bey is genuinely good support for James Bond. He is an interesting character in his own right. Is a bit stereotypical in the sense that all of the people that work with him are his sons, but also a genuinely good way to keep security. So it's a bit stereotype, but also makes a degree of sense and logic in the world. And he's actually a hero. I mean, he does really help out before his final result in the movie.
Yeah.
Also, a bit of trivia: his son appeared in License to Kill in 1989. The actor's son.
Very cool.
Yes. But
All
anyway,
right.
so we have the meeting with M, and we get that office, which has become such a staple that they ended up actually homaging that sets way deep into Daniel Craig's run. So like that ups the leather back to absorb sounds. That's very much an iconic set of the franchise.
And the hat on the hat rack.
Yes, yes, a very popular move back when Bond still had hats.
Do you know that in
Um,
your synopsis, Eddie, you totally left out Sylvia? Poor Sylvia. You know, she was in this movie for the blink of an
sh-
eye.
she did exist. That's true. I left her out because she contributes something to the movie. You're right. She's just a plot thread that was left over from Doctor No. Um, which is interesting because, like, again, the formula's not there yet. So the idea of Bond having sex with a woman and then her just conveniently disappearing and never coming back again is not quite a trope yet. They're still playing with they're still around and maybe still impact things, and they don't.
But that's when they were going to try to give Bond like an actual relationship that they think they
Right,
decide against that doesn't work for the character. And then you have
right,
the moral thing about if he's in like a committed relationship with this woman, why is he going around sleeping with everybody else? And it's
right, right.
versus the
Whereas
book Bond though, who is sexist but also is very much not a sex fiend like the film Bond.
no, he uses sex like a tool, like any other tool he would use.
But he doesn't have game, is also what I'm saying. And in the
Right, right,
books, essentially the books take a different thing where he needs to fall in love with someone to essentially then go and have that sort of relationship. And he gets like brokenhearted all the time, and it's a bunch of stuff.
right, right. That's a fair point. Um, and certainly doesn't have the same relationship with. I don't think Moneypenny's even in the books initially, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I've read them.
It's been 30 years. I don't remember her in them.
Um,
I am waiting for the Bond in New York movie though, Eddie, for when they make it. You're saying you're being more relevant to this movie.
to explain really quickly, Chris is joking about a short story that was written, which was basically Ian Fleming was asked to write a Bond story for Playboy magazine. He basically just wrote literally his New York itinerary as a Bond story. There's no actual plot. It's just I went to this hotel and I had these great meals and I had these great drinks. And oh, James Bond in it, I guess.
Oh God. It's like
Oh, the
Arthur
short
Conan
stories.
Doyle writing a Sherlock Holmes goes to the grocery store.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's exactly what it's like.
I
Look at
love
look at
it.
all this cool shit that I got to do that you didn't. Also, Playboy paid me to brag. Yeah, another bit of interesting trivia, because this movie is where the cinematography starts to get a little more experimental. Doctor No, again, very competent film, but it's more or less what you'd expect out of a slightly heightened detective story in 1961, right? It had some interesting location shooting and whatnot, but it wasn't really experimental. Um, one thing this movie is doing to try to another connection to Doctor No is that uh, when Bond arrives at the airport to when he is ambushed in the car is a shot for shot recreation of Doctor No. The characters are different, but how they shoot him coming to the airport, getting approached by a cab driver or by a driver, getting into the car, and then being followed as he leaves the airport is identical to how it was shot in Doctor No. To kind of they're trying to establish, okay, if this is going to be a franchise, how do we do franchise notes? This is a franchise note that gets lost, but they're trying to find something to give connectivity between these movies beyond just throwaway lines in the movie itself. So that's an interesting bit of where the franchise goes a different direction because the hastily cobbled together cold open becomes much more of a franchise thing than James Bond goes to the airport, finds a car, and gets followed. You know.
Hmm.
Yeah, so we also get real quick. I just get back. We forgot the Q scene. Another bit that was thrown in here to explain a bit later in the movie that becomes a franchise note of Q explaining the gadget.
Because in Doctor No, they had like Lieutenant Boothroyd or something another who came in. It was a different actor. I think it was Richard Burton's brother actually, who had
Okay,
scheduling conflicts, which is why Desmond Llewellyn gets to
I think
now
so.
come in to be Q, and then is Q for the rest of all the movies until I think he passes away.
Yeah. He's Q until he dies.
And in the
And
first one, it was crap. It was like here's your Walter PPK because the other gun jams too much and this has more stopping power and I think a knife. That was it.
right because Q is officially the armorer. And so in the first movie, he literally has that role, which is like, I'm going to give you your weaponry. Um, this is where we get into this is the interesting tipping point because he's still technically the armorer. It's the here's where we're giving you a sniper rifle, and here are the hidden weapons. So that way you can sneak weapons wherever you need to go. But then we start getting into the okay, there's a trick to opening the briefcase, and your shaving powder is actually a smoke bomb, and also here's the golden doubloons. So we're moving into proper gadgets, but we're not quite there yet.
I think the trick suitcase is in itself a proper gadget. Like having to know the little combination for that makes it a proper gadget.
Right? No, I agree with you. I mean, if you fall
It's no
into
submersible car.
right, it's not source of car, and also it's not, everything about the gadget is ultimately with the exception of the doubloons, is a weapon. So he's still an armorer. It's just the gadget is hidden weaponry. We're not quite into the, uh, crazy bullshit gadgets, that very soon. It's gonna happen pretty shortly, but we're not quite there yet.
I bet James Bond could bullseye someone like the Daredevil villain with that golden doubloon.
Ting, ting. Um, but also it's interesting because they also do over explain the gadget. And right, they spend a lot of time talking about this goddamn briefcase in this movie, which that scene's going to get shorter and shorter, or it's going to do other things, whether it's for comedy in Roger Moore, or whether it's to set up other pieces of information in before and after Roger Moore. Um, but the James Bond gets his gadgets that will be Chekhov's gun for sometime later in the movie does get solidified here, and weirdly, it's not. universal. We're gonna see in later movies where this gets omitted, or he just gets gadgets from nowhere. Because James Bond is a guy who has gadgets isn't quite established as a trope yet. So because it's not quite there yet, it's the no, the audience has to be really walked through. There's a lot of weird things happening with this briefcase.
Well, as you were saying, it's because it is a new piece that they're adding. Like the
Mhm.
weirdness of that briefcase needs to be explained to an audience that isn't taught the staples of the movie yet because they're still developing them. So you need to make sure they understand it before you can pull it out later.
Right. Yeah. We talked a fair bit about Ali Karim Bey, but again, fantastic character. Um, One of my favorite uh, uh, local chiefs of the Bonds franchise. Honestly, he's the right balance of fun and competent
Yeah.
for a Bond character.
I have to say though, I'm curious about that tunnel where they go under to spy on people. Are we there yet? Have we discussed the tunnel?
I don't think we're quite there yet.
All right. Never mind about the tunnel.
Yeah, we're not quite
I
there yet.
all right, Eddie. The camp. Do you want to go to the camp scene? Or do you want to
Let's
talk
do the
about
camp
something
scene
else before we go to the camp scene?
right now. No, I mean, I was just gonna mention Karim Bey, but yeah, let's go to camp scene.
It is I'd forgotten really how painful this scene was to watch with all the different tropes and stereotypes and everything else associated with it till I was watching it now. And it hit me like a fist. I was like, oh God.
Right.
And
Uh, Go ahead.
ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I've intentionally chosen to reword summary, for example, because they throw the G slur around a lot, which
Yeah.
that's not even media in the '60s. That's media up until like 10 years ago. So I mean, like, I'm not that I can be mad about it. But yes, all of his characters are full of stereotypes for Romani. Two women literally fight over bonds at one point in the movie.
No, they're not fighting over Bond. They're fighting over someone else. And
Eh,
Bond brings them peace with his magical penis.
well, right, okay, but they're not fighting over Bond initially, but they're basically by proxy fighting over Bond.
I'm going to push back totally on that because he doesn't exist yet before their fight starting. It's his penis that brings happiness to everyone. I do
uh,
love the fact. I'll drop the penis. Um,
yeah, dropped B.
I love the fact that Bond in this movie is competent and proficient, but still utterly fallible. He's saved by Grant up to 3 times, I think, at this point, and Grant saves him
Yes,
during the attack on the camp here. Again,
right,
to keep him alive until they need him to be in a very certain spot.
right. But one thing that is an interesting leftover of the novel Bonds that hasn't quite been divested yet, because you mentioned he's very competent,
Mhm.
and Grant certainly saves him. But also, when the fight happens, Bond fucks off for a fair chunk of the fight, and he starts attacking people only to progress his mission. As a result of that single-mindedness, you're right. He puts himself in a lot of dangerous situations that Grant has because Grant needs him to die at a very specific moment to fulfill Spectre's plan. Um, but there's an interesting moment where like the battle is chaos, and Bond seems to be kind of dodging through the chaos to accomplish something. And that's that kind of remnant of that very cold analytical accountant like Bond you were talking about from the novels that doesn't quite get worn away yet. We're not quite to the he's stylish and manages to this isn't quite him stylishly moving through the chaos to accomplish things seamlessly. It's the he's stumbling through it a little bit.
And I love it.
Right. But again, Kirin Bey is also holding his own along with his sons throughout that fight, which again proves that other members of the service are also extremely competent.
Well, Karen Bay and like his son Zoe, the head of the spear, they are actively doing all this stuff. So
Yep.
they're being heroic versus Bond,
Right.
who's being kind of a scoundrel, sneaking around the edges. Bond is Bilbo bagging it, if you will.
um, and it's actually Karen Bay that pulls the trigger on the assassin, um, uh, which is another great moment of the movie playing with the comedy of the Bond franchise, where it's like they find where the assassin's hanging out, and he's literally climbing out the mouth of a woman on a big movie poster on the side of a building. And so just the humor of that is pretty funny.
Was it Marilyn Monroe?
I don't know who the woman was. I couldn't tell because I'm on DVD, so I didn't have quite a clear view of what movie it was advertising. But certainly, it was a
I can't
blonde
remember.
woman in the film.
I think I can't remember if it was Marilyn Monroe or not. Because if it was, that would have been a nod just to Kennedy.
Maybe could have been. But again, like there's these comedic frames or moments. They're not explicitly comedy, but they're meant to kind of show that this is not quietly a real world. That's the Roger Moore era will go in a very different direction with. Let's put it that way right now.
We're not there yet.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm good if you want to move on.
Yeah, because I think we want to get to the embassy scene. So
Yeah.
eventually, Tatiana meets Bond at his hotel suite, where she agrees to provide the plans to the Russian consulate to help him steal the Lecter. The pair spend the night together, unaware that Klebb and Grant are filming them, because that's not creepy at all. Upon receiving the consulate's floor plans and a description of the Lecter from Romanova, the latter of which MI6 confirms, Bond and Karen Bay make and execute a plan to steal the Lecter before all three make haste to escape the city aboard the Orient Express. Aboard, Karen Bay and Bond subdue Commissar Benz, a Soviet security officer. While Bond returns Tatiana to wait for the rendezvous with one of Karen Bay's sons, Grant kills both Karen Bay and Benz. Angered, Bond questions Romanova's true motives. So this is all the Karen Bay uses his periscope to in the tunnels to
It
find
is the best because Eddie, that's not a tunnel. That is like an underground base, and it's so
It is.
open. They just like and walk all the way over. Then I'm forced to ask myself: do the other side also have their own like telescope periscope that's in their consulate too, just like on a different side? Because that is what it feels like. They spy on us, we spy on them. It's very casual, very gentlemanly.
I assume it's like just a timeshare thing where it's like, okay, we're going to be spying on your base on these days. You come spy us on these days. We'll use the same tunnel system.
It is utterly ridiculous and
It's
brilliant all
ridiculous.
at once.
Because yeah, it's like, and again, it in a way it also helps Karen Bay's character, because like the whole time he's like, we have a very modest operation here, it's just me and my sons. We're kind of keeping an eye on things here in Istanbul, and then they go down this giant tunnel with this periscope, and it's like very modest operation. And it's just like, how much money are you pumping into this? I love it. It just shows that Karen Bay is on top of all of this stuff. He's like, oh yeah, we can
So
find the consulate. I've already got it set up for you.
if they're going to reboot the Bond franchise again, I would like for them to bring back a Kieran Bay and have him be
Yes.
this proficient,
Yes.
if not more so.
100%. Love him. And then so yes. Oh, go ahead.
The sex scene filming. All right. When he finally meets her and she's all flirty, and when she comments about the size of her mouth and his response, full dead stop, Eddie. Like I'm envisioning the audiences in going like, "Oh my god!" and like people passing out. The whole thing.
One thing that's now it's been a minute since I've watched Doctor Who. No, so correct me if I'm wrong on this point. But this is the first time where a Bond girl has, at least for part of the movie, agency. She's seducing Bond just as much as Bond's seducing her. I don't remember if that happened. I don't think a Doctor No that happens. I think there's straight up Bond's using a woman as information.
There is the British actress who's pretending to be an Asian woman, has some agency when she hires people to try to kill Bond, but when he comes on into the room with her, he takes more dominance over the situation. He kind of tricks her. I think that's as close as it got.
Right. So that's not true, but like this sets up the idea that it's not just Bond slipping his way through women. The women are also just as much actively part of seducing Bonds to get information out of him as he is trying to out of them. So the sex scene is also a moment of the two plans coming in conflict in the two, because like he comes to the room and she's like under the covers already, so there's definitely intent happening there, which is an interesting piece that it comes and goes from the franchise.
Normally, I'd be the one that says, yes, 100%. They should be like boning like there's no bone to
Mhm.
not to be boned. But I will not say that here because she does not want to be there because we have to remember that Kleb came to
Right,
her
right.
and touched her hair and did a whole bunch of other stuff and essentially told her, you will do this because you have loose morals or we will kill you,
So
which removes
agency may be
her
the wrong word here.
agency.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a fair shout. So agency was
So
probably the wrong word here.
I am against it.
Yeah, because she is intentionally seducing Bond, but you're right. She does not want. She's not an enthusiastic participant in this. Let's put it that way. Uh, uh, she's reluctant to be involved, but her reluctance is not because the oh no, I shouldn't fall for you because you're a British agent. It's the oh no, I don't want to do this because I'm being forced to, and I feel like I have to because I'm a patriot.
Mhm.
Even though her patriotism is being used by Spectre to get what they want.
She would literally be taking it for the team.
Right. But again, there's interesting complex. It's not just a sex scene because Bond gets to have sex with a beautiful girl. There's actually a lot of interesting layers happening as a result of this scene. And so there's the relationship between Bond and Tatiana is complex through a good chunk of this film.
Yeah.
It's
And
not
it
just,
works
oh, and
really
here's the
well.
Bond girl that follows along with Bond.
And it works really well because he believes that she is fully in whatever the plot is with the Lecter.
Right.
So he's treating her very coldly and actively making her work harder to essentially seduce him. The just
Mhm.
Bond having sex with a beautiful woman happened with Sylvia before the movie, really at the early part of the movie.
Right.
And so that was a great piece, but the fact they're filming them should surprise Tatiana, but it shouldn't surprise Bond.
Right. Because from Bond's perspective, they know this is a trap. Tatiana is very clearly too good to be true. So Bond is going along with this to try to flesh out what the trap is. So he would not be surprised by the fact that he's being filmed. Tatiana, who knows this is a trap, but thinks that she has convinced Bond to be part of it. She doesn't realize that Bond knows it's a trap. So she's just going along, and she would be surprised to find out there is actually a trap happening beyond the trap that she
Yes.
already knows. So again, there's lots of different layers happening here, which is genuinely and because a chess master is allegedly behind all this, makes a degree of sense.
My thing though is when if Spectre had succeeded and they'd killed
Mhm.
Bond and everything else and they got everything else back and they release the sex tape of them together,
Right.
how does that really damage Bond who if maybe might have been associated with a government agency, but we would assume government agent, it would be like I'm a foul clerk in this building.
I think the logic is a British agent found having sex with a Russian woman. How do we know? Right after the Russian consulate is attacked, I think it's the intent to try to draw the UK into that conflict and to therefore damage their reputation.
Okay.
It's not clear in the movie, though. I completely agree with you, and also it's a thread that more or less gets dropped. So I feel like there may have been a part of the script where that was explained more and then got cut or something. But
Because they didn't know that they would attack. They just knew they would steal the Lecter. So they might have been able to steal the Lecter without causing any damage. Not in a Bond movie, but they might have been able to
right,
do that in a different spy movie.
maybe. Um, this is the point where, as much as I'm praising it, you're right. It is also a bit overcomplicated at times. Um, uh, eh, but like the vibes of the multiple things happening. Let's pivot quickly to the mosque scene, right, where they're trying to get the actual plans.
Yeah.
Um, uh, you have Bonds and Tatiana and Grant all in the mosque, all doing three different things while trying to avoid each other while they're all doing those three different things. And there's not much action in the scene. It's all just tension. Um, but it's a great moment of showing that there are these overlapping plans that are happening because Bond wants to get the plans. He actually has the most straightforward plan of all of this. He wants to go there and get the plans and leave. Tatiana wants to make sure he gets the plans, but she cannot be seen to be with him while he gets the plans. And then Grant has to make sure that he has to get the plans while also making it clear to Bond that there's a trap going on. So he has to threaten Bond, but do it in a way that makes Bond succeed. And the way it's shot, you get all that tension across without necessarily being entirely aware that you don't have to think through what all the plans are. You just know that, okay, they all can't be in the same place at the same time. And the threat of danger, if that doesn't quite pan out, is actually really palpable. But again, if you sit down and think of it, it's like, this is way overcomplicated of a plan, right? This is the master would be going, hey, buddy, have you thought of simplifying this a bit?
And throwing in the fact that in front of Tatiana, they say they were going to do it on like the 14th or something
Mhm.
to give her that sort of date. And then they change it to like the 13th without her really knowing about it. So once again, that's like another layer of complexity. Then how does this happen if she doesn't know it's supposed to happen on that day? So there's all those things going on. And I know, and it's noticeable now distinctively because I've watched this movie like a dozen times over like the past number of
Mhm.
years. And I'm thinking about it analytically, specifically for John Lewis. So that's an easy point to bring out. And it's not
Mhm.
like other things I brought out that we've seen it once where my mind just thinks about all the errors with it. It's
Mhm.
the amount of having seen it, processing it over decades and knowing this stuff already.
Right. Um, and I mean, another piece is, which I didn't notice until I watched the movie again, is that when number one is explaining to number three and number five, or sorry, when number five is explaining the plan, number one's talking about it at the very beginning when they had that conversation, they lay out the whole plan. And it's until about this part of the movie, Spectre's plan has more or less gone the way they want it to. So there's also the additional tension of all of this of like, has Bond fallen into the actual trap they're setting? Mm.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, and it's an interesting point that Tatiana is being manipulated by both sides. She's a person who believes herself to be completely in control of the situation, but in fact is being manipulated by literally everyone else in the cast, which is
And
fascinating.
I think Spectre's plan would have gone completely on point if not for, and this is a part where I want to bring up when Sean Connery, when Bond slapped Tatiana. Sean Connery at the time, I think, was also in his own thing about having physically abused a woman too. So there's a lot of
Yeah,
controversy and about that scene. But
right.
it's her response to Bond when that happens makes him realize that she isn't really in on the plot.
Yeah.
And I think it's that humanization of Bond in that moment is why the rest of Spectre's plan doesn't work. If he'd stayed cold and calculating, Spectre's plan would have went perfect because that is what they assumed he would do as a British secret agent.
Right. And so as a result, Bond's humanity, which is a rare point in most of these movies, becomes a pivotal point. And it also helps that uh, uh, both Connery and the actor who plays Tatiana are just killing it in that scene, right? It feels emotional. It feels visceral. Plus, they're trapped in a small train
Yeah.
room, so that helps to kind of really emphasize the immediacy of it. Um, because Connery starts off, "Hey, how's it going?" and then immediately starts cranking up the fury. And Tatiana can't handle that because you're right. If Bond had just been like, "Okay, no, this is a trap. I'm aware it's a trap, so I'm just going to keep playing along," Spectre would have won.
Yep.
But he's pissed, and then through that, realize because you're right. If he had stayed cold, he would have assumed Tatiana was part of the plan all along and would have followed that line of thought and fallen into the actual real trap. By realizing she was a dupe, he pivots, and we'll get to that in a bit here, where that goes. Um, but you're right. There's a as much as the trope of the Bond girl gets solidified here, part of it is because there's just so much genuine chemistry between the actors on the screen that you believe it.
And I'm not gonna lie, she is stunning, like beautiful,
Yeah,
gorgeous, unbelievable.
yeah. But it helps that Connery also is We have before dinged people for not having sexual chemistry on the screen. There are gobs of it. Like you believe this relationship, even though you know it's completely made of artifice. You still believe this relationship because these two actors are just so goddamn charismatic.
Well, it also doesn't hurt that Sean Connery is at, like, I think right now the peak of his everything.
Yeah.
Like swagger, chemistry, like physique, the whole 9 yards. Connery's it right now. So much so that he looks different somewhat than what he did in Doctor No, and will look different in the next movie, the movie after, will never look the same again. Like right now, peak. Oh, love it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Anything else before we get to the rest of the Orient Express stuff?
Just that this entire piece, even the next part we're going to go on, felt like it was filmed almost by Hitchcock and doing Strangers on a Train.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I was gonna talk about the cinematography a bit more than the fight scene. But at this point, you're right. There is a lot of Hitchcockian influence. Because the format's not quite set yet, so they're still trying to play with the tension of espionage in this, and it's coming across in cinematography. Um, it's an argument can be made that the whole movie starts off with lots of open, confusing spaces that get tighter and tighter and tighter as the movie goes on until it hits the actual climax. Um, so like there, even the very beginning, like yes, it wasn't a maze, but it was an open maze, and it was Grant had complete control of his space. Then you have the wide open chest space, and then you have the slightly smaller M's office and slightly smaller spaces, even the mosque, even though it was a huge space, it was shot in ways that the chairs and the architecture of the space was constantly cutting in and closing off the space. So visually, it keeps getting tighter and tighter, tighter as you move along, until it hits what we're about to talk about. But yeah, on those moments in that confrontation, the way it's shot, it's not quite a Dutch angle, but certainly there's a slight tilt to where both Bond and her are framed to help to intensify that scene.
And so, slight tangent. One of the things that we've always talked, that I'd like to talk about, is games I've run. And I've
Mhm.
run nearly all of the Call of Cthulhu campaigns, one of which is like Horror on the Orient Express. And whenever I was running Horror on the Orient Express, I would take a specific beat to go back and rewatch these scenes from Bond, because there's a piece where a vampire attacks him on the train. And watching this gave me inspiration for that fight scene to really think about the size and space of how a train would actually feel and operate. Given this movie shot in the 60s, Orient Express happens in the 20s, there's like a little bit of a 40-year difference, but still the confinements of the train are vital in a combats, which we're about to see.
Yeah, let's go into that. So when the train arrives in Belgrade, Bond informs one of Karen Bay's sons of his father's death and receives instructions to rendezvous with a British agent named Nash at Zagreb. However, Grant overhears the conversation, kills Nash, and assumes his identity, I say. He drugs Tatiana in dinner and overpowers Bond. I'm skipping over it because we'll talk about it. He reveals that Tatiana was a pawn in Spectre's Spectre's plan. He intends to kill both her and Bond, staging a murder-suicide, leaving behind fake blackmail evidence, which will scandalize the British intelligence community, which explains why he was filming it. Bond tricks Grant into setting off a booby trap in Bond's attaché case before the two engage in a fight, and Bond kills Grant. Taking the Lecter in the film of their night together, Bond and Romanova leave the train in Isteria, Yugoslavia, and use Grant's escape plan. They evade helicopter and boat attacks by Spectre agents before reaching safety. So, I mean, really, let's start with the point where Grant becomes Nash.
Yeah.
It's interesting watching it again. Grant never speaks until he starts being Nash. And then we realize he has a very posh, erudite British accent.
Well, we don't even know if he's putting that on, though.
Right, and that's the thing, is that up to this point, because he's so associated with Kleb, you're kind of inclined to believe he's Russian. And then he starts speaking with his accent. You don't know if he's mimicking a British accent or if he's a British agent.
I think
And
they
he's
say in the initial training scene that he's from like Britain.
Maybe.
I'm not 100% certain, but I think they reference that once. And
Okay.
part of it is, if I remember the book right, is that in the book he's described as always being like silent and having near like predatorial eyes or something being the most unsettling part about him.
Oh, okay.
So I think they
So
leaned into the silence more to make it more unnatural. He was like sort of a Captain America build with creepy werewolf like eyes.
But I actually like that because, you can almost see him kinda turn on when he starts pretending to be Nash.
Yeah.
So it lends to that he's just basically a weapon that has arms and legs, you know? Um,
Now
and
I'm
he's
curious.
extremely charismatic.
I'm curious if so the Punisher is a riff on Nash from this, or if the actor who plays the Punisher in the TV series was watching this and went, "Ooh, that's what I could do." Because the Punisher is much the same. If you go and watch, he turns on and turns off.
Uh, Honestly, if you watch the, pre-MCU Punisher movie, um, I always
Which one?
assumed that the one with the Russian in it, where there's a blonde guy who's silenced at the Punisher beats up, I
Or you
assumed
mean the
that was
Dolph
more.
Lundgren one? Do you mean
Yeah.
the
No, not Dolphin,
Jane what's his nose, or the
yeah.
one that the guy from Rome played in?
No,
Whew.
the Thomas Gray or Thomas Jane, you know what I'm talking about,
Yeah,
that
Thomas
one
Jane.
because and I also know that because hilariously, the actor who played the Russian in that movie, which was I believe is an homage to, Grant, who pretends to be Nash, the actor for that is Kevin Nash. So it's another joke.
Oh, I love that.
Um, but yeah, so I mean, the silence assassin is a trope that's been around, but I really feel like For Martial Love perfects that in a lot of ways. I think you could movies after this are probably going to point back to again, I mean, it's a blonde character in both those situations too. That idea I think resonated with people, and partially because the actor just did a fantastic job of just being this silent killing machine until he had to infiltrate, and suddenly just clicks in and goes.
I also think the actor who plays Grant is the salty sea captain in Jaws, like a decade later.
I believe so. He's also a writer, apparently. Did a lot of
Well,
writing, wrote a lot of books.
all writers are built like that, Eddie. I don't know about you,
Clearly.
but I myself am built like Captain America and I'm a silent killer.
That is definitely just you. I am built more like Bucky pre-Cyberarm. And
Oh
my
no.
comic book Bucky, the 12-year-old. Um, so, yeah, I mean, so and they actually spent a fair amount of time with Bonds, and Tatiana and Grant/Nash talking over plans, and so they get really, again, building up tension of, we know they're gonna fight, but let's take our time and hold off that for as long as possible and let Grant insinuate himself into the situation, uh, which is great. And again, like because they're crammed into a little compartment, the conversation feels very intimate as a result because the camera only has so much. Because apparently they actually shot on a train. They actually shot most of the scenes on an actual train. So there's only so much room for the camera to get to.
So I would think though that Grant is in fact could have killed Bond in this movie if Grant didn't have a specific place where he needed Bond to be. I mean,
Yeah.
starting from the train piece here in the fight, he still had to get Bond in a very certain spot. I think if not for that, he would have killed Bond.
Oh no, and that's implied because the fact that he was able to protect Bond during the fight at the Romney settlement, it's like I could have killed him
I'm
at any point in time.
I know I'm speaking specifically about their combat on the train when they realize
Oh yeah,
when Bond realizes he's enemy. I think that Grant is more proficient than Bond and could have killed him if he still didn't need to have him die at that certain spot.
not really. Let's just talk about that. Because I mean, let's be honest. This fight scene is probably one of the best Bond fight scenes. I'm gonna put that out there. Um, I don't know if it's the best. I haven't sat down and ranked them all, but certainly it is up there. It is one that I feel like it's homaged and referenced a lot, and certainly a lot of people talk about remembering this
Yeah.
fight scene. Um, and again, they slowly build up to it because there's a whole long point where Grant holds the gun on him and explains his plan. Which again, like we talked before, like the filming them as part of a elaborate cover story, it just feels like throwaway. It's like it doesn't really pay off the creepiness of the filming. But um, one thing I liked is right before Grant comes in, um, Bond fiddles with the briefcase again. And so the audience gets a quiet recap of here's how the briefcase works. By the way, remember the briefcase? You know, I'm honest to fiddle with it. So you get the audience gets reminded, oh yeah, that briefcase is rigged, or perhaps more accurately, this is the same briefcase we saw earlier because there's been some travel lately. And then Grant comes in and Bond tricks him into activating the briefcase. But even then, like Bond once again fills the briefcase, he pulls the gold coins out to try
Yeah.
to buy off Grant. Um, and so you have this moment of again because we know what's going on. Grant is trying to postpone this because Grant needs Bond to die at a specific moment, and is just telling him, "By the way, I'm going to kill you at this point." Bond is killing for time because he's looking for an opening. So even though both of them are talking what the words they're saying are not important, and I think that's the interesting part about this scene. That's why I keep saying the film doesn't really matter because what they're saying is not relevant, and it comes across in the body language of the actors. Because the guy playing Grant is just perfectly still, but Bond's always moving around. You know, if you watch him in that
Yeah.
tiny space, Connery's moving around. He's talking. He's moving his hands. He's fiddling with stuff because he's trying to find that moment to strike. And Grant is just dead still. He was very animated when he was pretending to be Nash, but when he becomes Grant again, he's dead still and just moves the gun slightly during the whole scene, but otherwise it's still. And I love that contrast visually.
All right. Anything else about this beat other than he takes in a helicopter with a pistol?
So, in the commentary, the helicopter and the boat scenes are not in the novel apparently, and were purely added by the director because he wanted to add visual interest. That's it. And that decision sets the tone for so much of the Bond franchise going forward. Of like, this action's here because we needed a minute of action.
You didn't, if I remember right, they were like over budget and they're running out of time, and they had accidents around this point too. Like I think
I didn't know that.
I think they were one of the helicopters where they had people on crashed into like the water and submerged, and everyone escaped alive.
Oh,
Um,
there was a story about that, but finish your thought.
that was a piece of it, and I think one of the drivers at like 6 in the morning crashed into something in there. And the helicopter scene here ended up being like a miniature helicopter, like a just
Yes.
handheld thing.
The prop director was talking about a story where yes, the helicopter they had planned crashed. So they were told at a local Air Force base that they had a separate crashed helicopter. It happened to be a close enough model, and they were going to go pick up that crashed helicopter, take it off the base, and use the parts to try to refurbish the original helicopter to at least shoot some scenes around it.
Yeah.
No one told the military base this had happened. So they show up, drive right past the guards, and say, "Oh yeah, we're
That's how
here
you get
because of so
shot.
and so." And they look at the thing, they start putting on the truck, turn around to a bunch of guys pointing guns at them. They go to prison for 2 days until
Yeah.
eventually the director gets them bailed out, or the producer gets them bailed out. But yeah, apparently one of the soldiers happened to be a James Bond fan and advocated for them to get them to talk and got them in touch with their producer to get them out.
Because that's how you get shot, or that's how you get disappeared.
Yeah. And I was just like, again, some stuff that happens behind the film scenes of these movies are wild. But yeah, the other thing is also, uh, uh, again, another last remnant of the novel Bond is how brutal this fight is. It's stylish in how it's shot, but also it's just a brutal fight that we don't quite see that again for a while in the Bond films.
Well, also up to this point, they didn't. This had fight cinematography, and so did like the big battle. But generally, Bond is just like punching people, like TKOing people when he punches them, like
Right.
down,
Right.
down.
Yeah.
Bit more.
And part of it is because like I do know this scene was filmed on a set. But even the set was pretty cramped, so they only had so much space to put the camera in. But they were able to take out walls and put a camera in there, as it were. Um, but there was a lot of uh, the way this was shot helped to really reinforce the brutality of the fight, I think. And again, it's a cinematography. They're using the visual of the space to sell a certain style. Um, that concept keeps going on in Bonds, but this specific way of filming and framing tension, I won't say it's unique to For Much with Love, but certainly it is an element that doesn't just show up in very many Bond films after this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap it up. So, learning of Grant's death and Bond's survival, Spectre's enigmatic chairman, who the summary says it's Ernest Blofeld, but you're right. I don't think his name's actually dropped in the film.
I even
Has
think in the
Kronstein.
credits there's a question mark.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, you are correct. Actually, yeah, it is question mark. So we'll just say Spectre's enigmatic chairman, who is unknown at this time, has Kronstein executed for his plan's disastrous failure. As the organization promised to sell back the Lecter to the Russians, Kleb is ordered to recover it and kill Bonds. Kleb reaches the pair while they are resting in a hotel in Venice and comes to their room disguised as a maid. Kleb orders Tatiana to leave the room while holding Bond at gunpoint. Tatiana then re-enters, tackling Kleb and knocking the pistol to the floor. Kleb and Bond struggle as Kleb attempts to stab Bond with a venom-tipped blade in one of her shoes. Tatiana picks up the pistol and kills Kleb. With their mission accomplished, Bond and Tatiana spend some time on a romantic boat ride. This is, in some ways, this is an interesting beat of the film in the sense that, now Kleb and, Kronstein taken off the board, and Kleb tries to actually pay off her arc with both Tatiana and Spectre. Um, but also, it does feel like the actual climax of the film was the fight on the train. And so, in ways, this feels a bit, I won't say perfunctory, but it's a bit of a downbeat in some ways for me.
For me, this is the climax of the film. Like the
Okay.
train scene was great. It was amazing. We have one of their number, like one of the heads of the organization actually coming into the field after all the other plans have failed, knowing that if she doesn't succeed, she's going to be killed. And Bond is holding her off with a chair, but is taking everything he has to hold this small woman, Eddie. Like she has so much
Oh,
will, so
sure,
much
yeah.
force of character that he can't stop her himself. It's only because Tatiana and his magical penis that swayed Tatiana to his side they were able to stop her. She would have killed Bond by herself. That is fucking phenomenal for that character. And in the book, she does kill Bond.
Wait, she does?
If I remember right, because I think Ian Fleming was like, take one day little break, was kind of tired of Bond, and she stabs that motherfucker. And he goes, oh!
Oh, now that you say it, you're right. It was kind of a Sherlock Holmes, but then he didn't really die in the next book kind of thing,
Goes to black.
wasn't it? Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. You're right. I do remember that now. I should read the book.
This is the climax of the movie. She's amazing. Like the movie would have been good without this scene, but this scene for me makes it great because he can't stop her. It is once again his humanity that him saving Tatiana and she gets to save him, sort of closing that arc for them and giving Tatiana agency to make her final choice about where she stands.
I do agree that this is the closure for Kleb and Tatiana, because Tatiana, after Grant, Tatiana says, "Oh shit, they were going to kill me," as part of because Grant explains that was the plan, and so now it's like I have no reason to support them. So her making the active choice, I'm going to work against Spectre now, and she still believes Smersh. Actually, I mean, I don't think she knows that Spectre is necessarily involved. She just knows that whoever hired me was going to kill me, so I'm now going to kill them in retaliation. But no, I guess I could see that more. Then, I mean, now that I'm rethinking about it, Maybe the climax is just sustained over both scenes, because you have two fight scenes. And it, honestly, now that you say that, in a way, the helicopter scene drags it down a bit. Because I mean, I
It
also think the
does.
helicopter and boat scene are extraneous. I've always felt they're extraneous.
Yeah.
And learning they were literally thrown in for visual interest just reinforces you can just cut those out and nothing changes in the movie.
Yeah. I 100% agree on those. But like this scene is critical.
I agree. No, okay, fair enough.
And it
Um,
also has future implications for other movies because we've talked about Bond is still trying to figure out who Bond is. Up till now, Bond is still
right.
relatively cold until that scene where he becomes somewhat more human. Going forward, Bond will have those more and more traces of that humanity throughout the character. It's not there really in Doctor No. It
No,
it sort of birthed itself in this movie, and then it is subtly sustained throughout the rest of it.
right, because I think it goes too far to say that Bond is going to have an emotional arc. I don't think that's entirely fair, but certainly, the character evolves over the course of movies, which is something that only happens in the first handful of these movies. Bond will become fossilized pretty soon after this, and then he'll say it won't be until Daniel Craig where Bond has any kind of emotional change as a character. I mean, if you oh, yeah, between let me phrase that, between movies. Because yes, for, Her Majesty's Secret Service, he does have an emotional arc in that movie, but then it's completely
Yep,
forgotten.
it's exactly where I was going. I just couldn't remember the name of the guy who did it for a minute. Lazenby.
Right? No, Lazenby does have an emotional arc in that movie, but then that movie is more or less explicitly rewritten, explicitly ignored. Because the next movie, if I remember correctly, intentionally tries to avoid referencing it and implies that it doesn't exist.
The opening scene of that movie, I think, directly references that, where you have Sean Connery coming back, like karate chopping people, like killing people to get to the scene where he kills who he believes to be Blofeld. I think
Right, right, right.
revenge.
Um, well, okay. The point is, um,
I know what
there's
you're saying.
the,
Primarily,
the,
you're
these
correct.
handful of movies are clearly meant to be more of have more continuity between them. Is really kind of what I'm getting at here. But you're right. They lose that. They get it back briefly. Decide they don't like Lazenby, and so they bring Connery back briefly to try to close that as fast as possible, and go back to the formula. And then it solidifies from there, and then it changes in different ways. But you're right. He has a relationship that persists between movies. Talking on this one, this movie is presumably in direct retaliation from what happened in Doctor No. And the mystery of who is the head of Spectre is a thing that the movies are invested in at this point.
As well, they should be.
And at this point, it is an interesting mystery. Who is a person who's number one? Who's trying to run this again? Something the prisoner parodies by just never telling you that because they realize that the revelation was not satisfactory. We'll get there, I'm sure. But at the point, it's exciting.
For me, I already said it. This is my favorite James Bond movie out of all of them, and I've seen all the James Bond movies. I take that back. I saw all the James Bond movies up to Skyfall, and I haven't seen anything after that. But this is my favorite one.
It is certainly one of the Sean Connery movies I really really like. Um, uh, because partially because it's not entirely a Bond film. I actually like it because it's not quite there yet. When I watched Doctor No, I was like, you can definitely see the rough edges. I can see where they're still figuring out. This one is a movie that's mostly got it figured out. It does a couple things that we won't see much of again. It does a lot of things that you can see it going forward. Okay, this is where it's going to go. Um, but also, I really like that this is a movie that James Bond is actually a spy. It is an espionage movie. It is a movie that the plot doesn't really work unless espionage is a thing that's on the table. He is not pretending to be anybody else necessarily, but the gamesmanship of plot and counterplot and counterplot is very much an espionage trope, and you see this here, and you don't really see a lot of it afterwards. So I love the movie in that regard because it's doing the thing it's supposed to be doing. It's a movie about espionage.
Yeah. I have no other closing thoughts. I put most of mine out at the opening. It's just that this is a phenomenal movie. If you haven't seen it, you should have seen it before you listen to us talk about it. But it's still a great movie to go and watch right now.
Definitely. So, Chris, which James Bond movie are we going to talk about next?
As if people had to ask, if we're talking about
Right.
some Sean Connery movies, we have to talk about the one that established Bond who he is, of being the character and all the tropes, and that is, of course, Goldfinger. He's the man. I could sing probably the whole thing because Shirley Bassey nailed it out of the park, hands down, for that movie.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about Shirley Bassey, but I'm sure we'll talk about it more next episode because that's her one of her iconic songs.
Plus, she did not with this movie, because this movie is all like "From Russia with love." So the whole thing is just going to be me singing Bond themes going forward.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Is like we haven't talked much, but like the Bond's songs are just most of the themes are bangers. Dr. No again there was no. It was just the James Bond theme, right? That was always the one they had.
That's not true. Eddie, they had Three Blind Mice, not sung by Harry Belafonte, and Dr. No opens with three black characters pretending to not be able to see.
Right.
There's a lot of reasons we didn't talk about Dr. No.
Yes. But theme songs wise, many of the James Bond themes did well as singles, and a lot of that starts with Shirley Bassey. So we're not quite there yet. We'll talk more about that in Goldfinger, I'm sure.
So, Eddie, if people are looking to find you to talk about James Bond, to talk about your work, or just generally give you money in these turbulent times where artists like ourselves need money because they're out drawing and writing on street corners for people, where could they do those things?
Rattle my cup full of coins at people.
Tuppence, tuppence.
Tuppence. Not a thing we have anymore. But if you wanted to slide me some money, the best way to do that is to pick up my dog game Realms of Pugmire at realmsofpugmire.com. I get a slice of those game sales. If you like role-playing games, if you like fantasy games, if you like dogs, those are all things that you may enjoy if you pick up Realms of Pugmire. But if you want to just chat with me, you can find me at pugsteady.com. That's me on Blue Sky, or you can come to the Darker Hue Discord. What about you?
If you want to support me, you can go to my website and buy one of my, I think I'm down to maybe 30 copies of Haunted West. That's money that all comes directly to my pockets to buy more coffee, to then make Eddie do more ridiculous podcasts. Or you can join my Patreon, Harlan Bounding, where I have a plan that I am working on right now that I'm a day or two behind on, but I gotta get to it. But if you want to talk to me about James Bond, you can come to Dark Hue Discord. If you want to talk to me about the G.I. Joe movie, you can come to me on Blue Sky, where I'm Darker Hue.
So with that, we will talk to you next week when we talk about Goldfinger.